Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina Chang. Chapter 19. No More Secrets. Marinette hugged her pillow tighter as she cried softly from her bed. She hadn't bothered trying to get down, but instead de-transformed and gratefully took the Kwami's small offers of comfort as she tried to get her feelings under control. After a while, Tiki gently shooed the others away and listened sympathetically as Marinette quietly poured her heart out to her little companion. "I love him so much, Tiki, but I want to love Cat Noir." She wiped a hand across her face with a mournful laugh followed by a dry chuckle. "This sounds so stupid, doesn't it?" Tiki's normally cheerful gaze was downcast and she shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think so. Don't be so hard on yourself. You just have a lot to figure out yet and need to give yourself more time." Marinette burst into tears again. "Oh yeah, messing with time is the last thing I need. Don't you remember what happened the last time I fell in love with Cat Noir? This is hopeless, Tiki." Tiki nudged her cheek helplessly. "Nothing is hopeless, Marinette. Maybe you should go outside and let the fresh air clear your head a bit. And stop being the perfect victim for an Akuma. Yeah, I know," Marinette said dryly, though she cuddled the Kwami closer to her cheek. "Thanks, Tiki. You're right. We'll figure something out." The Kwami hugged her back, then disappeared to give her some space as Marinette wandered up onto her balcony. She sucked in a deep breath as she tried to steel her nerves and gazed determinedly over the warm gold and purple sunset, then broke as the invisible weight and sorrow crushed down on her, and she buried her face in her arms as she cried against the railing. It was almost peaceful as the wind brushed gently through her hair, and the familiar sounds of buses and footsteps drifted up from the street below. The last rays of the sun pressed comfortingly about her skin as she let all of the fears and aches wash away with the silvery tears that flowed down her cheeks. She sighed as her cries faded to wispy hiccups, and she glanced up to find two watchful green eyes staring back at her. Marinette bolted upright as all poetic thoughts flew from her mind, and she was suddenly awkwardly conscious of the sliver of wetness around her nose and the splotchy red marks that doubtless covered her face. She quickly wiped her sleeve across it and forced a smile as she greeted her unexpected visitor. "Cat Noir, what are you doing here?" Cat Noir shifted nervously from his perch on his stick, then shrugged with a tender smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to check up on you." After a nod from Marinette, he hopped over the rails and came to stand beside her. He gently smoothed a strand of hair from her eyes and brushed away a tear that lingered on her cheek. "Why are you crying, princess?" He was always so direct, yet thoughtful. Marinette's heart clenched and she glanced away to hide the tears gathering in her eyes. "Well, you know how there was that boy I liked? I met him at school today. He's still awesome and amazing, and my heart lights up whenever I'm around him, but there's also this other boy." Her cheeks warmed and she knew she was blushing fiercely, but she hoped the growing darkness would cover it. Part of her wondered why she was telling him any of this, but the other part needed him to know. "He's kind and brave and sweet, and while I didn't have my memories, I realized just how much he meant to me, and would have gladly given him my heart, but couldn't because the other boy had it first. And now I love both of them, which makes no sense and hurts so much, and I don't know what to do." Cat Noir quietly drew her to his chest as he wrapped her in a sheltering embrace and listened as her muffled cries slowly started to fade. He knew the struggle she was going through, and his heart ached for her, but at the same time he couldn't help being secretly delighted. "What if you didn't have to choose?" he murmured softly. Marinette pulled away in confusion. "What?" "What if you didn't have to choose?" he repeated more firmly. "I don't know what you mean, and I would never go out with both of them if that's what you're thinking." "No, of course not. I just meant, well, you know how I've been in love with Ladybug for so long?" She froze, then slowly nodded her head. He couldn't help smiling a bit at the shy blush that tinted her cheeks, but quickly focused again. "I've been in love with Ladybug since the day we met. Fate kinda tied us together, and it just felt like being with her was my destiny." Marinette giggled slightly, and he knew she caught the reference to her falling out of the sky on him, and he shook his head with a grin as he couldn't believe he hadn't recognized her before. He gazed sincerely in her eyes as he went on. I could never have done any of this without her. I know she often doubts herself, and sometimes she gets understandably overwhelmed by all the crazy threats we face, but she picks herself up and keeps going in spite of it, inspiring others with her courage and bringing hope and freedom to a city that would otherwise be crippled by danger and fear. She was just one girl, but she stood up to Hawkmoth and united the whole city in a confident and gracious way. He looked down with a smile. I knew then, just as I know now, that whoever she was, the girl behind the mask would forever hold my heart, and I would gladly spend the rest of my life showing my love for her. Marinette had slipped her arms back around him, burying her rosy face into his suit with a smile that was both wistful and sad, and his sensitive ears picked up on the small sob she had tried to smother. He slowly rubbed his hands across her back in a comforting fashion, then said softly, But then I met this other girl. She stiffened almost imperceptibly, but hesitantly relaxed as he continued the soothing motion and went on. She's kind and sweet, and every bit as brave as Ladybug, and whenever I'm with her I feel like I'm finally home. She has this warmth and compassion that she shares so freely and wraps around you like a fuzzy blanket. She has the most beautiful eyes and the cutest smile, and I can't help but think about her all the time. He smiled as he tightened his arms around her and cherished the peaceful rippling current her presence sent to his heart. She's always been there for me, and at first I thought of her as a good friend, my best friend even. But lately I've realized my feelings have changed, and I notice her more and more. Of course, I didn't want to admit it out of loyalty to Ladybug, who I still care for deeply, but I couldn't help noticing. Then I found out she was the same person, and I loved her even more. Marinette's heart had sunk at the mention of this other girl, and the more she listened, the more she realized Cat Noir's feelings for her had clearly shifted, and she was about to pull away when she froze, as his final words fully registered in her mind. The same person? He stepped back slightly, brushing a soft leathery hand across her forehead, revealing the small yet vivid red cut perched above her eyebrow. Well, it's not every day that my two best friends are hit in the head so badly they forget who I am. And after you described how you got your memories back, I knew it had to be you, since I was there. Marinette stumbled backwards, her mind screaming over what her heart already knew. But that's impossible. The only other person there was Adrien. The name slipped out in a half-whisper as she took in the green-eyed cat boy before her, and her eyes wandered up to the wispy blonde hair that stood out above a charmingly familiar grin. She stared at him questioningly, and he seemed to take it as an invitation, for he quickly announced, "Claws in." Marinette instinctively squeezed her eyes shut as a bright flash of green flooded the balcony, but after a moment she peeked them open, knowing what he suggested she'd find, but unable to believe it was true. Yet there they were, the same orange sneakers, the same casual blue jeans, the same stylish overshirt and striped black shirt that hid a heart of gold. Her gaze slowly found his, and her breath caught inside her as her heart swelled in wonder and stunned relief. Adrien had hurriedly begun talking, his face lined with worry as he said, "I know we aren't supposed to reveal our identities, and I didn't mean to force this on you. It's just, once I knew it was you, Adrien." Marinette wanted to slap herself and focus on what he was saying, but her head was still trying to wrap itself around the chorus of Adrien is Cat Noir. Adrien is Cat Noir. He reached his arm awkwardly behind his neck as he looked beseechingly into her eyes. "I really wasn't trying to find out anything, milady, I promise, but now that we know..." He stepped forward and took her hands between his. He paused, as if to see whether she would pull away, but when she didn't, he said softly, "I've never felt more lucky in all my life. You mean everything to me, Marinette, and now I know why. I love you." As she stared into his devoted, adoring green eyes, Marinette decided right then and there she wouldn't care how many timelines she'd have to fix. This was worth any risk. He was worth any risk, and she would never stop fighting for him. They stood in simple silence for a moment, and Marinette's heart slowly healed as the two boys in her head melted into one, and she could have fainted for joy if Adrien's voice hadn't brought her back into the present. "Marinette?" he prompted gently. "Earlier, when you said you met that boy, did you mean the boy that you love?" She ducked her head for a moment, but raised it again as she looked him in the eye. "Yes, it's you. It was always you." His heart overflowed as she rushed into his arms and gave him a tight squeeze. "I love you, Adrien." Happy tears ran down his face and puddled along his chin, but he didn't care as he pulled her close and returned the hug with a choking laugh. He had suspected and hoped that his guess was true, but he hadn't realized how much he needed to hear her say those words, and the astounding joy that came with them. They swayed together in a mixture of tears and laughter as they both embraced this new reality and relished each other's company. They were both shaky from the shock and exhausting emotions that had been tearing through them from before, and after a moment they sank to the ground and sat side by side, Adrien with an arm wrapped around her waist, and Marinette with a hand threaded through his. Adrien's heart glowed as Marinette sighed contentedly and rested her head on his shoulder. "I forgive you," she said softly, her eyes still closed as she leaned against him. Adrien raised an eyebrow curiously. "For what?" She smiled wryly and turned to look at him. "For making me fall in love with you twice." "Oh," Adrien chuckled, though he couldn't help feeling a little proud. "I always knew you wouldn't be able to resist me. But, to be fair, I really did try to tone down my awesomeness." Marinette rolled her eyes, but smiled fondly as she glanced up at him through her lashes. "I know, but that just made me fall for you harder." She shifted to face him, and his heart stilled as she traced a hand along his face, and he listened in captivated wonder. "You're always so selfless and thoughtful, and you put your all into everything you do. When we first met, I thought your love for Ladybug was misguided and superficial, just a joke like everything else." He opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again as she pushed a playful finger to his lips. "But the more time we spent together, the more I understood how real it was. And when you were willing to put all that aside to protect my wishes and wait for a memory that might never come back, I realized what a perfect partner you really were." Adrien's smile widened at the pun, but it soon faded into awe as her words filled his heart and wrapped around his very soul. "I loved you when I lost my memory, but I've loved you for so much longer than that. You've always been so patient and understanding, brave and charming, with a gracious heart and courageous spirit. It would be impossible not to fall for you." She drew her hand away as she lowered her head shyly. "But I was already so in love with you that I chose not to see it. My heart belonged to Adrien Agreste, the kind, handsome, endearing boy at my school, which is why I couldn't bear the thought of some clever cat swiping it out from under him." She looked up, and Adrien's brows furrowed with concern as he noticed the tears swimming in the elegant fields of blue. "I'm so sorry." Adrien lightly lifted her chin as he leaned forward supportively. "Why are you sorry? You've nothing to apologize for." "But I rejected you so many times. I know I hurt you, and I don't see how you could still want me after I put you through all of that. Maybe if I had been brave enough to confess my feelings, all this would have been avoided, but I was always too selfish, too afraid of rejection that I never got up the courage to let you know how loved you really are." Adrien smiled gently and gave her a tender squeeze. "I won't pretend it didn't hurt, Bugaboo, and I have to admit I'm not sure what I would have done if my everyday Ladybug had confessed her true feelings to me. But I'm sure you've had your share of heartbreak too. In fact, I know you do. And I think we found out at the perfect time, when we could both love each other fully without worrying about the masks." Marinette sniffed, but nodded in agreement, and a dazzling smile soon spread across her face. "You're right, Adrien. This is the perfect time, and I'm so glad I finally know it's you." He stared into her eyes for what seemed like a blissful eternity, but was abruptly distracted by a rough tug in his shirt pocket, and he sighed as he glanced up at the fully darkened starlit sky. "As much as I treasure your company, milady, I'm afraid I should probably get going." He offered her a hand as they reluctantly rose to their feet, but as soon as their eyes met, they both burst out laughing. "I still can't believe this happened," Adrien exclaimed, and Marinette gestured wildly in agreement. "I know, Adrien, a crest, is standing on my balcony, but 2 seconds ago he was wearing a bell and cat ears. And is deeply in love with you," Adrien added, bowing low as he glanced adoringly up at her and gave her hand a fervent kiss. "Oh, and there is that," Marinette replied casually, but giggled slightly as her cheeks lightened to a gentle pink. Adrien stepped back with a smile. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Marinette. I'll always be here for you, and you will always be the only girl I could ever love." Glints of starlight shone through Marinette's eyes as she gazed up at him, and he watched fondly as her stunned expression shifted into one of peaceful trust and gentle affection. "You're the only one who's ever held my heart, and no one could ever replace you. I'll never leave you, kitty. It's us against the world, right?" Adrien smiled contentedly, gathering her in his arms as he pulled her close and rested his head atop hers. "Always." It felt so different to hold her with his own hands and feel her softness against his bare skin. The wind ruffled softly against his untucked shirt sleeves and toyed delicately through Marinette's hair as the small midnight strands tickled lightly beneath his chin. It was so different, but special. Perfect. Right. Their hearts beat in sync for a moment, then jolted wildly as a loud voice boomed from behind them. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Thanks for listening. It finally happened! The reveal! I hope it's everything you hoped for. And it's not quite done yet, as you probably guessed. I do have a very special ending planned, and so be sure to tune in for the last part of Marinette Hits Her Head. Thank you all so much for sticking with this story for so long. I can't believe it took me almost a whole year to finish writing this. Or actually, maybe almost 2 years now. It's been a long time, and I'm really sorry about that. I hope to be getting more on top of things, but at the moment, it's still pretty random. So anyway, thanks for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day. Bye.